There we go. Just so students can see a little bit more about your background, Dr. Caston, and the kinds of things that you have done. And also, we are going to record this info session just because we have had several students ask. And I think, Emily, you were going to start recording, right?
I just turned it on, yes.
Thank you so much. So we were going to record so that we have some other students who weren't able to participate at this time so that they can get the same information. And so what I will do at the moment is turn it over to you, Dr. Caston, and then later on I can talk a little bit more about the UK nomination process for students who are interested.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see here, I was a Marshall Scholar now 18 years ago, which feels like forever, after graduating straight from UK. And over the years now, I finally worked my way back onto the selection committee. So I now interview and select Marshall Scholars for our region. So in that capacity, I think I can give you a little bit of an inside peek into the selection process and into the selection criteria. And of course, I'm happy to talk about myself and what an unbelievable, life-changing event winning the Marshall was for me. I, as you can see here, always had a little bit of a biomedical flavor to the things that I was interested in. I was able to pursue that at UK. And I knew from probably high school that I wanted to try to study at this particular place called the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So winning the Marshall was just an absolute dream. It opened the doors to an entire world, both professionally and also personally. The Marshall is very unique and amongst all of the competitive extramural scholarships because it's funded by the British government. It started as a thank you gesture for the Marshall Plan, which you might remember from the Second World War was the post-war reconstruction plan that the United States provided for Europe, but primarily for the United Kingdom. So it was a huge amount of US taxpayer investment into the United Kingdom to help them rebuild all of their infrastructure after the bombing and after being decimated after losing so many men, et cetera. So the Marshall Scholarship is a diplomatic goodwill thank you gesture from the government. It's funded mostly by the British taxpayer, though of course it has an endowment and investments, and so it funds a lot of the scholarships off of the endowment. But that has given it a very distinct character and a very distinct flavor compared to the other famous awards that you've probably heard of. So we're most commonly contrasted with the Rhodes, and I think that's a fair comparison. So just quickly, the difference between the Marshall and the Rhodes. The Rhodes only has 32 scholars for the United States, whereas the Marshall has a somewhat fluctuant number of awards. It does vary based a little bit on how we allocate regionally within the United Kingdom and how well the investment's doing. But 40 is a rough area. It's been a little bit above that now on average for the last few years, but let's say 44 or 45 versus 32 for the Rhodes. The Rhodes is only good for study at Oxford, whereas the Marshall is good for any university of higher education of any kind in the United Kingdom. You can study absolutely anything you want as long as it's a formal accredited degree granting course. So we've had applications in just the wildest things imaginable. I had an application this past year from someone who basically wanted to be the next Jeremy Clarkson and do automotive journalism. And he found a master's degree course in automotive journalism that exists. So you can do that. You can do studio art or any kind of performance. You know, I had somebody that went out to the Hebrides, they won, and they're going out to the Outer Hebrides, this island chain way off the northwest coast of Scotland to study fisheries. It's literally anything you like to do, and actually the commission strongly favors people who would like to explore and see the entire United Kingdom, not just Oxford, Cambridge, and London. As you can imagine, since this is a diplomatic sort of goodwill gesture, they want everybody to appreciate the nation at large. So the diplomatic flavor is also something that's quite unique compared to the Rhodes in particular. So there's a lot of, I won't say duties, that's a little bit strong, but there's a lot of very exciting opportunities to kind of liaise with the British government and be a representative of the United States when you're on the scholarship. So you will have multiple meetings in Parliament, for example. You'll meet a lot of figures of the sort of the created class of lords and barons and that sort of thing, who represent various charities or patronize specific organizations, and you'll do photo ops and ribbon cuttings and all that sort of thing, again, as a representative of the United States. There's a lot of cocktail parties, actually. There's a lot of like sort of diplomatic soirees and chit chat and that sort of thing, where again, you are expected to be not only a good representative of the country, but also liaise with representatives of the United Kingdom. So that is certainly a very exciting and unique characteristic of the scholarship. I can say at UK, I don't think we didn't have quite so many duties along that line. So that was a very like Brave New World kind of thing. The Gaines Fellowship was absolutely marvelous for kind of getting me ready for that. Thanks, Dan.
Please.
But, and then the Gates is the other scholarship. So the Gates is much, much, much larger. There's over 200 Gates Fellows that study every year. The Gates is just for Cambridge. Again, it's open to people who want to study anything at all, but it does have a sort of heavy STEM flavor to it. So you can go on a Gates and study English or anything you like, but it has most people who are selected kind of are in the natural sciences. And then I suppose the other one would be the Fulbright. The Fulbright is usually, again, sort of less formal, less geared towards like a formal education and degree seeking course. So it's a little bit different from the Marshall as well. So it's just a springboard into the widest, most amazing world imaginable. That's all I can say. I think anybody you speak to will say automatically that it was the most formative, life-changing thing that ever happened to them. It's a lot more than just getting a degree on your resume. It's an entire experience.
Jennifer,
that, yeah.
well, I just want to agree with you completely. It changed my life just as much as it changed yours. And I won't go on, which, as you know, I have a tendency to do. But if anybody wants to ask me in detail about that, I will. But it had absolutely as much an influence on me as it had on you. And I became a Russian historian completely because of a Marshall. That's the only reason I'm in Russian history my whole life. So.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to go to the next slide, Pat.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the bare minimum, just so everyone can see this. Your application won't even be read or considered if you don't meet these criteria. But as you can imagine, for example, the minimum GPA criterion is 3.7, and that is indexed to some of the colleges in the United States that have extremely rigorous grade criteria. But for the most part, anyone with a GPA of only 3.7 probably wouldn't be considered terribly competitive. So again, these are just sort of the bare minimum criteria to even get your application read.
Dr. Kasten, can you talk about how the current situation, has the Marshall Committee decided yet how this semester will be reviewed and thought of, with a lot of schools going to automatic pass-fail, or?
You know, we haven't discussed that. It'll probably come up once we start looking at applications in the fall, because as you can imagine, this is the largest region in the United States, by the way, our region. So we have the largest number of states, and we have the largest base population, and we have the largest number of undergraduate institutions in this territory. So we are used to dealing with a lot of heterogeneity in terms of how colleges even award grades. So we'll probably come up with something honestly ad hoc in the winter when we start reviewing everything. But probably there'll be some sort of fudge factor.
Okay.
But not too much, because unlike you know, like elementary schools, for example, right now are forbidden from penalizing students who don't have access to the internet, obviously from just a basic equity perspective, right? So they can't award grades because there might be children who just can't do work from home. But I think for colleges, that is probably going to be less of a factor. I don't know, how is UK, for example, how is UK addressing this? Are they, I imagine they're still, are they going to pass fail?
It's not, my understanding is it's not for everyone. The students can nod their heads or somebody can speak up, but they can choose to go pass fail as long as they let their faculty know by May 1st. Is that correct?
Oh,
So
is that
they
right?
can make the choice based on how easily or not they've been able to make a transition in their studies during this time.
Can I ask the two of you, what are you all studying?
I'm studying music education and
Oh, sorry, that cut out. I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm studying music education and mathematics.
Okay. And when was it?
I'm
When,
studying communication sciences and disorders.
okay. So music education is really interesting because did you have student teaching placements or anything like that that obviously you can't complete?
Oh, you cut out partway through.
Oh, sorry. I was saying for music education, did you have student teaching placements or something where you obviously can't complete it now?
Yeah, so a lot of my classes are like singing in choir, playing in band, playing in the jazz ensemble, taking flute lessons. So they've found ways to do Zoom meetings and move a lot of that content towards a more written and academic side of things than the in-person skill-based sort of thing. So we still are finishing, but a lot different than what we expected.
Yeah, I don't know how we're going to do this, to be honest, because I've never even thought about it till you just asked. I mean, I don't know if we'll say courses like that where you obviously need some in-person component, or science labs where you need to actually be like pouring reagents into bottles together to actually do the lab. That'll be pass fail, and understandably so. And paper-based courses where you're submitting essays and such, we probably would look down on that being pass fail, or I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. We've actually talked about some of this, but you might talk about these selection criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the three main criteria, and this is on our website. This is not like insider scoop information. So these are the three big buckets against which an individual application is judged. Academic merit, I think, should speak for itself, but we're indexing you not just to your university at large, but we're indexing you to the entire applicant pool. And we're looking for people who, more than anything, show a lot of passion in their studies and show a lot of depth in their studies. So we are again, if you want to contrast this with the Rhodes, we are much more sort of amenable to taking people who are like the true scholarly types. If we take a Marshall Scholar who 50 years from now is one of the world's best Russian historians and has published 1 million books on Russian history, we say, fantastic, we achieved our goal. In fact, if we took somebody who ended up like becoming a managing partner at McKinsey, we might be kind of like, that was a miss. And the Rhodes is looking more for people who are like future masters of the universe. So academic merit can be very, very deep. You can absolutely be a mathematician who's the world's best topologist, and you've published 4 articles in a topology journal, and you are a topologist, and we say marvelous. Or we can look for somebody who's got 4 majors and has taken a huge array of very diverse courses at very high levels, etc. I'll say we are all very good at looking at padding. So if we feel people have padded their GPAs, if they've taken a lot of very easy courses, if they've taken the critical, difficult, discipline-specific courses, pass, fail. Again, COVID aside, we look on that as, a little bit of a mark. So it's what you think, but again, we're looking for people who are pointy, sort of really excellent and really dedicated and really passionate in what they do. We do not privilege one particular discipline area or major type over others intrinsically. And there is a very vague attempt to balance the scholarship awards by discipline, but it's very vague. It's really not hard and fast at all. So if we took 30 out of 40 people who were all mathematicians, we would say, oh, that's how it went this year. That's okay. Leadership potential is the same. So also, I think that's probably fairly self-evident, but leadership can be demonstrated in a lot of different ways. Leadership can also be demonstrated through intellectual leadership, so research, publications. You don't need to found an organization for us to think that you're a good leader. You can certainly take over a large one and run it very well. We like to see some proof of efficacy. So just listing on a CV that you've joined or run or whatever 10 different organizations without saying what you've actually accomplished, that's not seen as strong. So there needs to be a record, there needs to be proof, there needs to be output. And again, we define it very broadly. So it could be intellectual, it could be artistic. We have a pretty good cohort every year of people in the performing arts. So their leadership is different. Their leadership is, I'm, first chair in my studio, I am a semi-pro, I am whatever, right? And then ambassadorial potential is kind of the nebulous one. So I told you guys at the beginning, and this is not a sales pitch, this is an absolute fact, that there is a strong diplomatic component to this award. You are considered to be a representative of the United States of America, and the British taxpayer and the British government is paying for you to come over to the UK. So they want to get their money's worth. And we want to make sure we're sending people that represent the very best that the United States has to offer. That's defined under so many different, criteria and categories, right? But, whoever you are and whatever you believe, if you can do that with integrity and you can show what this country is, we look on that very well.
I didn't put in, just for the candidates, I wanted to give you a sense of how the timeline works. And Jennifer, you can also feel free to comment on that. The application is not yet open for those of you who've looked at the Marshall website, and I strongly encourage you to do, because there's a lot more information there, but we didn't want to just duplicate the whole thing in a PowerPoint. So it's not yet open. Do you know when the application will open? No? Okay. So it probably...
It's always in the fall. Yeah, it's always September-ish.
Yeah, they said early spring, but this has been a very unusual spring. And so probably it might even be early summer, because they may be thinking about if they need to make any changes. So, but we will have our campus deadline. At this point in time, I understand from being on a conference call with the Marshall administrator that they are still going to look at their normal fall deadline, which is the very end of September or the very 1st of October. And so we are moving along with a similar timeline on campus, which means that your applications are due on September 1. And the reason we have to do that is because we have to go through a nomination process on campus. And so we have to get your application and set up faculty committee, and they review and interview you, and then they make a decision, and then they will give the students some feedback if you are selected as a nominee, so that you can maybe go back and clarify some things in your application, and then resubmit, and then we submit to the Marshall review, and then our region, which goes up to Chicago, or that's where they do the interviews. I'm not exactly sure, but there's a committee that reviews the applications submitted in our region, and then they decide who they're going to interview, and then they notify those candidates as finalists or semi-finalists, and then if you are selected for that, you go to Chicago and interview, and then after that they notify who is the Marshall Scholar. So that's how the nomination process works and how the timeline works. And so I strongly encourage all of the students who are on the call, or other students who see this and review this later, to get in touch with me. The earlier the better, so that I know that you want to be a candidate, because then I can answer questions for you, and you have to actually have chosen your academic programs. When you were looking at the programs that Dr. Caston did, you have to have chosen those, because those will also be part of your application. And so a lot of you probably may not be looking right now at British universities and what program you might take. So you would need to think about, well, what programs am I going to apply for? And Dr. Caston, do you want to talk about the 2-year?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. So the first and foremost is that your application is an application to study a specific thing in the United Kingdom. So it's not just pick me, it's a specific application. That being said, we don't hold you to what you write in your application. So if you decide in August that you want to apply to wherever, Cambridge, and then by December you've discovered there's another program that's even better, that's perfectly fine. We won't, if it's a dramatic change in discipline, like if you have a degree in, let's keep using math, and you decided you wanted to apply for this master's in math, and we say, great, we've chosen you. And then all of a sudden you say, actually, I'm going to study Renaissance literature. We might, take a step back on that. But you're at this program that you've selected and around which you will build part of your application is actually not something we will hold you to completely. That being said, as Pat just mentioned, we have different categories of awards. We actually have 1-year awards now, which is new. We have 2-year and 2-year awards. And there is an option some years when you're already on the scholarship to apply for a 3rd year of funding. That's usually granted to people who are studying for PhDs because British PhDs are only 3 years long. So if you've started a DPhil, you can apply for funding from us to finish it up. It's usually not awarded anymore to people who want to do an extra 1-year master's course or something like that. And we do have, like I said, we have a small number of people who apply for just a 1-year program. They want to just go to the United Kingdom for 1 year and then come back. And so that's not like disfavored. It's not like, man, what's wrong with them? They don't want to stay for 2 years. That's perfectly fine. And we have some internal scoring rubrics about all that sort of thing, but there's no internal advantage to you to choose a 2-year program versus a 1-year program. Hi, Wendy.
I had understood previously when talking about these 1-year awards, so it seems like maybe something has changed a little bit, that students should only apply for that if they already had a specific commitment for the year following. So they had been accepted to medical school and they could only defer for a year.
You would, again, I don't want to make it sound like the 1-year awards are disfavored, because they're strictly not, absolutely not, I promise. But the question would be, if you didn't have something else lined up right away to come back to, the question would be, well, why do you want just 1 year? But it doesn't have to be, I've been accepted to a program. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to med school or law school. It could be, I'm going into the Peace Corps, or I'm going to try to get on and be a legislative aide in Congress, or whatever. As long as you had a clear plan about why 1 year in the UK really made sense for you and your trajectory, that's fine.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah. And then, as Pat was saying, so you cannot, as an applicant, you cannot apply for the Marshall or the Rhodes directly yourself. You have to be nominated by UK. So UK will hold internal interviews and decide which candidates they want to nominate. They'll write an institutional endorsement of you, which we read very closely.
Oh, good.
And then there's usually about 300 or so people that get through from the institutions in the Chicago region. And then we'll invite 40-ish to interview, around there. Maybe a little less, maybe 30-ish. And the interviews will be in Chicago, and you will find out the results pretty quickly after the interviews.
And how many awards generally come out of our region?
It does vary year by year, and so we have that guidance given to us by the MAC, the Marshall Aid Commemoration Commission, at the beginning of the interview season.
Okay.
But we are the biggest region.
Okay, and let me see. Just wanted to let you guys know you can reach out to us. Information here is the website. I strongly encourage you to look at it. It's really important, I think, to read, to not assume that you know everything about the Marshall from our discussion today. You want to read carefully yourself. I also didn't put in a slide, and I guess I should have, in terms of the application. There is an online application that you complete. It has essays that are part of that application, your transcript, obviously, and also 4 letters of recommendation. And that's before you even move into the university nomination and then the university nomination letter stage. So you definitely also want to be thinking about what program and institutions would you be interested in? How will you write about these various categories, leadership and ambassadorial potential and academic merit, but also who would be best to talk about you. And I don't know, Dr. Kasten, if you would like to talk a little bit about recommenders and what you feel makes an effective recommender or recommendation letter?
Well, an effective recommender is someone who knows you backwards and forwards and who writes something that's authentic and genuine. And we can tell instantaneously if we're reading just a canned form letter that this person has written for 100 other people or not. Sometimes people, especially at the more famous colleges in the United States, they try to get very famous big names to write them letters because they think that that will carry a lot of weight. And like we read a letter once from President George Bush, Bush 1. And you might say, wow, President Bush. And it was, why did President Bush recommend this guy? It was because he played tennis with this guy's dad. Well, that's not a very strong endorsement, is it? And this, I don't know if President Bush had ever even met the kid, but the letter certainly didn't sound like it. It sounded like he was trying to just do some razzle dazzle with some big names, and that did not look good. So anybody who knows you very well, who can speak to you as a human being, as well as your academic work and everything else, that's who we want. Most people, I certainly did when I was an applicant, try to get some balance. So this is an academic award. Your strongest letters are going to be from people who teach you, who are your research mentors, or a professor you've taken several courses with, or something like that. It's going to be an academic letter. You definitely need those. But then it depends on the flavor of your application. But if you're someone who does a lot of community service, if you're someone who does a lot of political activism, if you're in the performing arts, whatever your flavor is, you definitely need to pull in letters that will speak to that side of you. And your letters need to make a case for also why you in particular should represent the United States as best you can, and also why the particular thing you're trying to study makes sense. So if you're, I'm going to keep using the mathematician. If you're a mathematician and you've got 3 mathematics professors who are writing you great math letters, but you are writing me that you want to go study violin, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I hear, oh, you're a fabulous mathematician. Why should we send you over here on the British taxpayer's dime to study the violin, right? So your whole application needs to be kind of a cohesive story. I will say this, I just pulled out the whole President Bush thing. So I'm from Kentucky. My family's been in Kentucky since Daniel Boone. I went to UK, obviously. And when I was an applicant in this process, I was kind of nervous about that. I thought, wow, I'm going to be up against all these people from Harvard and Yale and Stanford, the people that have gone to Exeter and Andover, the people that have gone to all of the, Math Olympiad or God knows what, right? All this famous stuff. And I've never done any of that sort of thing. So how will I possibly stand up? And I'll say, it's not what you think. I'll just say that. And genuine achievement and genuine passion shines through anybody's application, no matter what their background is or what school they're coming from. That being said, anybody, it doesn't matter where you go to college, anybody will need to show some kind of sense that their world is big, that they've left the domain of their university, that their world is big. They've been outside, and I don't mean like international travel or something like that, but that you're extramural, like you're already showing some impact in the world at large. And if you can show that, it doesn't matter what name is on your transcript. Trust me, I was very worried about this, and now I'm on the other side on the selection committee, and I promise that's the case.
Some of the students, would you like to ask questions, or do you have questions? Remember that you're muted, but you can unmute yourself if you have questions.
I have a question. You mentioned that one component of it is our ability to contribute to the diplomacy side of things. Is there any way that teaching can be incorporated in that at all?
I think so,
Somehow.
but you'll have to show me how in your application.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could I just interject for a moment?
Of course, please.
Because one of the ways, I mean, maybe what Jennifer's saying, this whole ambassadorial thing component wasn't there when I was there. And I kind of wish it had been. I love cocktail parties. I shouldn't admit that, but I do. But I think singing is something that's done essentially in every part of Great Britain, from the Outer Hebrides to to Cornwall. And of course, you can go to a pub and sing, but almost all communities, no matter how small, have choirs. You meet people there, and you are representing, I think, the United States as you do that. Not only in the quality of your voice or whether you can read music, but just in the quality of your person. So it seems to me that a musical background is actually very helpful that way.
Yeah, there's really so many ways that you can stretch that, and it's on you as the applicant to show us how. I really do want to reiterate that we are looking for people who want to explore the entire UK. Now, what happens sometimes is that message gets passed on, and so students think, oh, if I put for my program something besides Oxford, Cambridge, or London, my chances are better. That's what I'm going to do. And so it'll just be the most random course in the world, and they'll have absolutely no reason about why they selected it. You're like, really? Why do you want to go to Norfolk? Why? What's in Norfolk? Why did you pick that? Why this course? Who do you want to study with there? Why that? And they have no idea. They just picked it because they thought, oh, that'll game the system, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is, please look around at the entire UK. Find a course that's right for you. That course could very well be at Oxford, Cambridge, or London. It absolutely could be. That's where I went. It was the right place for me. But you have to show us why. Why that course, okay?
Any other questions from the students? It might be helpful also if our two Marshall Scholars would talk a little bit about gaining education in the United Kingdom and how that might be different from a US degree.
Yeah. Well, Dan, you want to go first?
Well, sure. I did something that almost no one does anymore. I did a second undergraduate degree. And I did that because when I went there, graduate teaching consisted of meeting your advisor once a month. And an undergraduate degree, on the other hand, I had tutorials twice a week. So I felt I just had a much more intense academic experience. And I really did. I don't think people used to say that taking the final exams in Oxford was, since the demise of the Confucian exams in Imperial China, the most difficult experience that there is. They begin on a Wednesday morning and they last until the following Tuesday night. And it's really something. It was a very intense experience, but it was an undergraduate experience. But I think maybe both as the graduate and almost certainly where you'll be, the graduate level and the undergraduate level, you're left much more on your own. There's much less kind of hand-holding. You're given a reading list, you come in, whether it's a graduate seminar or an undergraduate class, you come in with your ideas put together very often in some kind of an essay, and it's much more back and forth. You're treated as much more of an equal, I think, in an academic system. And the higher you go in the graduate level, the more that's true. And so now, I know at Oxford, but I think this is true generally speaking, the different departments really take a much more robust role in how they train you. But I don't know, it's hard to know exactly what the difference is, but it's just much more independent. And I think it's better for you. I think that's to say you learn more, and you learn more to be on your own and to represent your own opinion and your own self than you do almost in any other kind of American context. That's not a very good answer, Jennifer.
That's a fabulous answer. The only refinement is that now we actually do not permit people to study for a second undergraduate degree. They've done away with that.
That's probably good. I think I'd agree with that probably. Yeah.
But that's exactly correct. And so, so much of the American education system is very tick boxes, kind of external achievement driven. And, there's a lot of trophies and there's a lot of little status markers of success, right? And the UK is really different. And you can be really difficult to adapt to that because it's so independent and there's so few signposts or goalposts along the way. So now they've adopted a few kind of American style things where you do get marks on your essays. So you have a vague idea about how well you're doing. But for the most part, like when you study for an undergraduate degree, you don't have any grades of any kind until you take your final exam. So undergraduate degrees being 3 years long on average, you won't have any clue how you're doing until those finals. And the finals are actually indexed to the entire nation. So everyone reading English will submit essays, for their marks, and then the entire nation will be graded kind of at the same time. So if you get a first-class degree in Britain, you've gotten a first-class degree for the entire nation. That is just such a radically different way of doing things than the US, right? And the graduate study is even more so. So graduate study now has been split. There's a huge proliferation of what are called taught master's courses. I did those. I did 2 of those. They can be extremely topical. Like I told you about the automotive journalism one. I mean, it can be really narrow. And then there's some that are a hybrid of a year of being taught and then a year of research. And then there's some master's degrees that are just research. PhDs or DPhils in the UK are strictly research. There is no classroom taught component to them at all. So that can be very difficult to get used to. So when we say taught, that can vary based on where you are. So I did my first taught master's was in London at the London School of TROPMed. And that was taught in a classroom, mostly with doctors from the developing world. Those are most of my classmates. And that was in-person lectures and demonstrations and practical stuff including like having a cage of mosquitoes strapped to your arm from 9 o'clock in the morning till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But that is a highly atypical kind of quasi-professional degree. Most of the others, like the one I did at Oxford, will be a few tutorials and group lessons where someone will give a lecture. There's a lot of lecture-based learning, even in the sciences or the arts. And then one-on-one or two-on-one tutorials. So for a tutorial, you'll write an essay, again, even in a science subject or the arts, and you'll sort of read it out loud to your tutor who will critique it in real time. And then they teach in this extremely Socratic method that is extremely effective. It's like the old-fashioned classical dialogue method of learning, where someone just hammers you to defend your ideas, to pick apart your arguments, and to make sure you really understand complicated concepts. So it's completely unlike anything in the US, even tiny graduate seminars. It's even more unique and very effective. But it is quite different. And you only have a couple of those a week. So on your own, you have to be good and you have to be reading, like they'll give you a list of like 30 books. And most of us Americans, I was like, oh my God, I have to read all 30 of these books, because that's how it works in the US. If they give you a syllabus and they say, read these books, you read all the books, right? Not in the UK. They give you 30 books and they expect you to read about 10, and you have to choose which are the 10 most important ones. And then you have to get into your tutorial and why did you pick those 10 ones? What do you think you missed out on the other 20, etc. So it's a very different approach, but it's a really nice complement to our American education. And of course, for me, I came back to the States and went to medical school. So there's not a lot of conceptual thinking in medical school. There's a lot of drinking from a fire hose. So I feel like a lot of doctors are not taught those kinds of critical, dialogical kind of skills. And so it's been foundational for me as I've moved out of just medical training into trying to be an academic and write and do all sorts of other stuff. I feel like I have this enormous like armamentarium to draw on and all this critical thought, like just shaping my thinking that most doctors will never get. And it's all from the UK and UK. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
The other thing that's really different, by the way, is how unbelievably international studying in the UK is. They're well less than half of the people in graduate courses at Oxford or London are British, well under half. So you'll be working and learning alongside people from all over the world. And that's a pretty fabulous education in and of itself.
Hannah, did you have a question?
Oh, yep. Sorry, it cut out a little bit. You mentioned that you did one of your masters in Oxford and one in London. Was that one 2-year Marshall scholarship split between 2 schools, or 2 separate scholarships, one for each degree?
Well, so I was a 2002 scholar, so I was in like the boom years, the lush years when the endowment was enormous. So I did a 1-year top master's, and then I applied for and was accepted into a PhD at Oxford. So I started in a DPhil there. That was in like mathematical modeling of epidemics. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. The project that I had joined onto, this is another huge difference. When you apply for a PhD, you apply for a specific project that the supervisor's already laid out, unlike in the US where you kind of come up with your own. So the project that he had laid out didn't work. And it was just a really unproductive experience. So I got a 3rd year of funding and switched out of it, and then did a master's in history. That is unlikely to happen now, but 3rd year funding happens for sure, but that particular sequence would be unlikely to happen now.
But they do expect, Hannah, if I understood part of your question too, I mean, it's not uncommon to move to 2 institutions
No,
on your
very
Marshall.
common. Totally common, and in fact encouraged.
Yes,
So
so
that
you might be in the northern part of the country and
Yeah, exactly. So you can see different parts of the UK, so you can experience 2 different universities.
So
yeah,
you could go
absolutely.
for like an MUs at University of Edinburgh or something, and then go for a like math and Phil at Cambridge or something like that, and that's
Exactly
an
right.
option.
Yeah, as long as you can justify both courses, absolutely. I got accepted, this is going to be out of left field, I got accepted to a master's degree in medieval Welsh literature. So as long as you can justify it, they're like pretty cool.
Medieval Welsh literature.
Yeah, at Aberystwyth. Mm-hmm.
Aberystwyth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember at the moment, but do you apply, I mean, you apply for your Marshall and then you get interviewed. And do they also then apply directly to their course? I can't remember when that step comes in, or if Marshall helps them do that.
You won't apply to your course. Well, you could. You certainly could. But typically you don't. The MAC will help you apply to your course. The MAC, again, is the Marshall Aid Commemoration Commission. So they'll put in a good word for you and make sure you have a spot. It is not a factor in your selection, just so you know. But after you win, the MAC asks around, what are your chances of being accepted to your course? Because some of the courses are extraordinarily competitive within the UK, as you might imagine. They might have a lot of internal candidates that are really good. They might have explicit criteria about courses you need to have taken beforehand to even be qualified. You might not meet them, etc. So there's some behind the scenes maneuvering after you win, but it's not held against you in the application process. Like if we somehow knew that you did not have enough foundational math to take this econometrics master's at the LSE, we would still interview you as though you were going to take that econometrics master's, even though we knew you might not be able to get it. You know what I mean? But the MAC gives you a pretty big boost. And the Rhodes House does the same for the Rhodes Scholars. It gives them a big boost to get onto their courses at Oxford.
Do we have other questions from the student audience? Anything else that we should mention?
You know, maybe I'll just say one little thing, having worked on these scholarships for a long time. I think it really makes sense to start now thinking very hard about how to present yourself. I don't want to say this while Jennifer is listening, but that's all right. But this is an exercise in self-presentation, among other things. And so you need to sort of imagine what Jennifer is going to be reading when she reads your application in a few months' time. And you need to be thinking about that now. Like what's your package of recommenders? How do you describe yourself as a whole person and not just as a series of grades? Or or just, this or that interest. And it takes thought to do that. You can't do it in the last, 2 weeks or something. You really, the summer is a great time to be thinking about that, I think. Working with Pat and working with your UK committee and also working with your recommenders. But I think the time between now and when you actually submit the application is just gold, pure gold. And oddly enough, I think the epidemic really makes it a better time to work on this because you're by yourself and you can kind of get something that when you were at UK in your senior year or junior year, you didn't have much time of, which is just a time to be by yourself and think about things. Your parents, if you're with them, might also be good sounding boards, though you probably don't want to know that. But anyway, I mean, this is a great time to be doing that kind of personal introspection, which I think is really a crucial ingredient. Because, as Jennifer was saying, they want to get some sense of who you are. And you need to figure out how to present that.
Yeah, like I keep saying, authenticity is probably the most critical value that we're trying to grasp. I think we can all tell when an application is just sort of slick and polished and people have been on the hamster wheel for so long, it's just yet another thing they're applying for. And they can't really tell us why. And so if we can feel why, then that goes a long way.
Very good. One other thing I'd like to say is that Dr. Caston was supposed to come to campus April 8th. She was going to do this talk in person. And obviously, we are not able to have meetings on campus. So she agreed to do this via Zoom. And we're so grateful for that and that this worked out. And thank you to the students who are able to be present. I hope that in a future year, we will be able to have you back in Lexington so that we can meet you in person. But are there any other questions from students before we conclude? And you can always, I mean, don't be shy. This would be the time to ask them. You have 2 Marshall Scholars who are happy to talk to you about their experience. But you can always, you can send me email later if you think of a question. But
In Winter, you've been very quiet.
I think she had to log off. I don't think
she-
she's there anymore. Yeah.
That would explain.
That explains it. Well, Amy, how about you? You're in the dark. I can't even see you.
I don't think I have.
you're still muted, Amy. I think you tried to unmute.
Sorry, I was just saying I don't think I have anything, but thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
it
right.
is fun. I'll tell you, the interviews are at the Consul General's residence in Chicago, which is on Lake Michigan on something like the 60th floor in the penthouse. It's a nice place. You get to see the whole lake and the whole city and be in the Consul General's house and be surrounded by pictures of the Queen. It's fun.
Yeah, we would really love to have a student in Chicago this year. So all of you who are on this call, try really hard. Let me know if you're interested. And thank you. Thank you for coming to participate. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much, Dr. Caston, for your time. And Dan, thank you. It's good to see you. It's been a while. So
Well, it's
thank you
great
so much
time.
for supporting this.
And Jennifer, I just want to let you know that I've been scheming with the Marshall sort of alumni committee. It's not called that. It's the Association of Marshall Scholars, to have a Marshall Scholar reunion in Lexington, Kentucky.
No way. We never
Yeah.
had any events anywhere close to here. This is great.
Well, that's the reason that I'm getting a lot of good reception. And Pat and I are going to work together on that too. And it's going to be in connection with the Pope Bill, of course, which is a great Anglo-American project.
Of course. Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, UK had another Marshall 2 years before me. That was Monica Grant.
Yeah.
Monica's now, she became
Monica Grant.
Huh?
Monica Grant.
Monica Grant, yeah. She became a demographer, and so now she's a professor at the University of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And then wasn't there someone in about 4
In
years?
2014, Dahlia Darge was a Marshall Scholar, and she is now in the military. She was commissioned as a second lieutenant before she went on her Marshall course, and then she's doing her military service now.
She'd probably be less available unless we wanted to go to Afghanistan.
Yeah, yes, it's hard to get her, yes. Thank you all. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so very much. It's good to see all of you.
Good to see everybody, especially you.
Yeah. You too, Jennifer. You look fabulous, of course.